Good evening. My contribution to the Curating the Women's History Museum will be a history of African American women in slavery. I've chosen four women that I thought made a mark on their times by their bravery, their innovation, and their intellect. So, having chosen those women because of those features, it was very hard to choose one to do a more in depth study on. But with the help of our class librarian, Ed, I was able to find a woman that I had never heard of before. And so she was very interesting to research. And I hope that you find her life as innovative and as interesting as I found it. Her name was Lucy Terry Prince, and she has the distinct title of being the first African American poet in the colonies. Lucy Terry Prince was born around 1730 in West Africa. We have no records to tell us what Lucy Terry's birth name was. She was kidnapped from her home as an infant. In West Africa in the 18th century, it was probably ruled by one of the ancient kingdoms like the Great Benin Kingdom. The ancient Benin Kingdom ran from the Niger River Delta in the east to the modern day city of Lagos, Nigeria, in the west. The beautiful child that would later be noticed for her quick wit could have come from any part of that great kingdom. The child was brought from to Rhode Island, where she was sold to the Terry family in Enfield, Connecticut. Lucy was again sold in 1735 at the age of 5 and moved to Deerfield, Massachusetts. Lucy's master, a Congregationalist minister in Deerfield, Massachusetts, saw that she learned to read and write. In 1746, at the age of 16, Lucy was the witness to a surprise attack on her frontier village by a tribe of Native Americans. She wrote her description of the raid in 28 lines of couplets. What we can ascertain from this is by the time that Lucy had reached the age of 16, she had found her wings. And in spite of what must have been a horrible existence, Lucy found a way to free herself. She freed her mind through poetry. It is said that she was quick witted and a prolific writer. We do not have but one sample of her writing left. It was published in 1855 by Josiah Gilbert Holland in his History of Western Massachusetts. However, it is believed that she wrote it shortly after the massacre in 1746. And so it was passed down for over 100 years as an oral um, poem. And it was also put to music. This simple poem, written in 1746, when Lucy was 16 years old, would make her again the first African American poet, as it predates the first poem published by another famous African American woman, Phyllis Wheatley, who published her first poem in 1767. I was able to find one rendition of the poem, and I'd like to share that with you.
Bars Fight by Lucy Terry Prince. August 'twas the 25th, 1746. The Indians did in ambush lay some very valiant men to slay, the names of whom I'll leave not out. Samuel Allen like a hero fought, and though he was so brave and bold, his face no more shall we behold. Eleazar Hawks was killed outright before he had time to fight. Before he did, the Indian see was shot and killed immediately. Oliver Amsden he was slain, which caused his friends much grief and pain. Simeon Amsden they found dead, not many rods distant from his head. Adonijah Gillett, we do hear, did lose his life, which was so dear. John Sadler fled across the water, and thus escaped the dreadful slaughter. Eunice Allen see the Indians coming and hopes to save herself by running. And had not her petticoat stopped her, the awful creatures had not catched her, nor Tommy hawked her on the head and left her on the ground for dead. Young Samuel Allen, oh, lack a day, was taken and carried off to Canada.
Again, this was a rendition of Lucy Terry Prince's only poem that we have still in writing, Bars Fight, and here's a copy of it. In 1756, Lucy Terry marries Abijah Prince and regains her freedom. Abijah Prince was a former slave who had gained his freedom and land from his former owner's will. Abijah purchased Lucy's freedom and they moved to Guilford, Vermont, where Abijah owned land. Abijah and Lucy had 6 children that were educated in the Guilford schools. One of their sons, Caesar, went on to fight in the Revolutionary War. Some notable facts about Lucy. Lucy argued unsuccessfully before the trustees of Williams College for the admission of one of her sons, skillfully citing scripture and law in a 3 hour speech. He was turned down because of racial reasons. Lucy successfully argued before the U.S. Supreme Court their case against the false land claims of a Colonel Eli Bronson who tried to steal one of their properties. Now, I did some research on this, and I'm not sure. There are some sources that say that she argued before the U.S. Supreme Court, and other sources that say she just argued before the Supreme Court. And I'm thinking that that meant that she argued before the Supreme Court of Vermont. Uh, because the lawyer that was supposed to represent her later went on to become a justice in the Supreme Court of Vermont. So, I'm kind of leaning toward her arguing at the Supreme Court of Vermont. But at any rate, she argued it without any formal education and won. She won her land claim. So I think that this tells us or points to the fact that she was a very talented orator and was able to hold her own in almost any situation. Lucy also became an activist after gaining her freedom, using her home as a community gathering place for the hot topics of the day. Lucy Terry Prince died July 11th, 1821, in Sunderland, Vermont. Lucy was 91 years old. She had been born free in West Africa, kidnapped and enslaved as an infant, and regained her freedom at 26 years old. Despite the barriers put before her, Lucy became a skilled orator who used her skills to advocate for herself and her family. She became the first African American woman to argue a case before the Supreme Court of the United States. Lucy refused to allow her mind and spirit to be enslaved, so Lucy died the way she was born, free. Just a little epilogue. Much of the information presented about Lucy Terry Prince's early life is conjecture based on historical information about what was going on in Africa at that time in history. The truth is, we don't know where in West Africa Lucy Terry Prince was born. That is what it means to be an enslaved person. You have no past. You don't know who your parents were or what your ancestry may have been. We only know about this woman's amazing life because of her incredible accomplishments at a time in history when to be African and a woman was to be less than human.